You're listening to Cottontail's podcast, part of the Silicon Valley Black Project, which produced the documentary film A Place at the Table about the Black pioneers of Silicon Valley. A Place at the Table can be viewed for rent on Vimeo.com on demand /A Place at the Table STEM. Through Cottontail's podcast, the Silicon Valley Black Project will continue to recognize the contributions. We will be featuring African American professionals and technologists in the fields of engineering, administration, and entrepreneurial pursuits from the past and present. Today we will hear from retired IBM executive Wilbur Jackson, one of the Silicon Valley Black pioneers featured in the documentary film A Place at the Table. Wilbur, how did you start your career in Silicon Valley?
I joined IBM in 1968, and it was an interesting journey to become a member of IBM because I tell people that I had never heard of IBM. I went to a small, historically black college in Richmond, Virginia Union University. We did not have a curriculum in computer science. We didn't have engineering. We were primarily, science was biology, chemistry, physics, and I took all of those courses, so I was interested in science, and IBM came and recruited on my campus, and I said, okay, what do you do? Because I wasn't aware, and they said, well, we're looking for people to work in human resources, we're looking for people to sell our products. I said, I'm not interested in either one of those. He says, well, we're looking for people to help program our computers, and I said, okay, I've never worked with computers and I don't know what programming is, but it sounds interesting because it's scientific and I'm interested in science. So I went to programming school, learned how to be a programmer, and started my career in software development, which in hindsight, I'm so happy I did that because I really feel like a pioneer in the software industry. I started in 1968. I had the pleasure of working on so many really advanced projects that were very creative and state-of-the-art. In fact, they were ahead of the technology in so many ways. I'll give you one simple example. The first project I worked on was called TSS, Time Sharing System, and that system had functionality in it like virtual memory and virtual machine, which are things that are sort of integral to a lot of the computers that everybody uses today, but it's under the cover, so it doesn't get a lot of PR. But I was on the cutting edge, if you will, of those developments. So I learned a lot, I enjoyed it, and I continued in that career. From there, I worked in, we had a military application where I did some programming for a missile defense system. And that was interesting because I didn't know anything about missiles, I didn't know anything about radar systems, and I had to learn all of that in order to program for those operating environments. So that was about 5 years, and at the end of that project, 1976, I had the opportunity to come to San Jose. And at that point, I wasn't really sure, again, what was going on in San Jose, but in some level, I didn't care as long as it was an opportunity to learn new things and to advance. And I got in, I enjoyed it, I learned a lot. Again, leading edge technology. San Jose is where all of the storage systems that we take for granted today were originated, and I did the software development for those. And of course, I became a manager, and I had about a 30-year career managing a variety of projects. I tell people that one of the things that I worked on, again, I'm very proud of, is we had a concept called system managed storage. And if you think about computers today and how we use them today, it's human managed storage, not system managed storage. So if you want your data, your critical personal data, to be safe and secure and available to you at all times, you have to manage it. And we devise systems that would manage it for you, so you didn't have to worry about it. And of course, if you're in business, that's very critical because you don't want to have your people spending all of their time managing their storage. So that was fun. I learned a lot, and we actually produced something that, again, was cutting edge, leading edge, advanced technology, and that was, again, the fun part of being involved in the computer industry. From there, I continued to work in the management. Again, very interested in the advancing of all of the different technologies, but at the same time, I felt that it was important to understand the business side of the software industry. So I started to get more and more involved in things like marketing, which was not my forte, was not my educational background, but I did realize at that state in my career that without marketing, all the technology in the world doesn't do any good because nobody has it, nobody is aware of it. So I had to learn what marketing was all about, and again, another learning experience. I took a little bit of a detour during my career, and I got involved in an intellectual property dispute that was international in nature. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. Again, another learning opportunity. So I learned about intellectual property management. I learned about arbitration, major corporations. So there were major corporations internationally competing in the same space, and there was a dispute over who owned the intellectual property. So I got in at a point where we were actually defining the law that governs the whole idea of software as an intellectual property. So again, I enjoyed the experience of learning about law, which I never studied, didn't know anything about, but gained a lot of experience and knowledge through that process. It was very important, and my manager at the time says, you know, the other thing, you're not thinking about it like this, but your E to R is pretty good. I said, okay, E to R, what do you mean? He says, well, the amount of money that you're spending to prosecute, if you will, this intellectual property dispute is making more money for the company than how much you're spending to get that dispute resolved. And I said, well, I never thought about it like that, but that's a good thing. I mean, when you're in business, you have to realize that you're in the business to make money and, you know, not to waste money. So again, that was another learning experience. From there, I continued in the management field. So I have about 30 years of management experience. When I retired from IBM, I started a consulting business, again, management with all of my clients were software development companies, and I helped them advance their operations as well. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the management, I enjoyed the technology, I enjoyed learning the legal side of the business, the marketing side of the business, the design, the technology, all of the above. So I look back on my career with a lot of fond memories because I touched it all. I touched every aspect of the business.
Okay. Along the way, you had mentors. Who were they, and how did they help you throughout your career?
When I first joined, the notion of a mentor meant absolutely nothing to me. And I felt like all of my preparation through high school, secondary education, college, it was all about me, right? I had to study hard, I had to work hard, I had to make good grades, and I didn't need any help. I could do it all by myself. And so the biggest challenge I had working in the industry was realizing that I couldn't do it by myself. And then ultimately that was a key to me to become a manager, because when you are a good manager, you have to learn how to delegate and work with people and get things done through other people, not through your own hard work and your own abilities. So that was a tough lesson for me. And I always tell people the hardest lesson I had to learn was how to say no. And because I felt like saying no was an indication of failure, and I didn't like to fail. So learning how to say no in a way that was not an indication of failure was a very important lesson for me. You had to be able to say, here's why it can't be done, here's what it's going to take to get it done, and here's why it's important to get it done. And that was an interesting lesson, because before that, I never had to answer those questions. I would just get involved in the project, learn it, and make it work. And so I worked on a lot of projects where a lot of people were naysayers. Said, this project will never work. This cannot be done. This is too complex. This is too hard. And everything was a success. So, it was just very, very difficult for me to envision a situation where you had to say, oh, this can't be done. So by learning how to say no, I wasn't saying it can't be done. I was saying, this is what's needed in order to get it done right. We're on schedule, in budget, with the right quality level. And that was an important lesson to learn.
And who was there to check you and say, it can't be done?
I had several mentors, and some of them were kind of negative mentors, and some of them were very positive mentors, but they all had good intentions because they all were trying to advance the business, and I had to understand that sometimes it was a personality thing, and you had to get around whatever that personality contention might have been. So I think I first realized one of my mentors because about the second year I was with IBM, I had my second manager, and he called me into his office one day and he said, you need to come in and talk to me periodically. I know you're doing your job and you're getting everything done, you're meeting all of your schedules, but just come in and talk to me. Let me know how you're doing. And I said, oh, okay, if you insist. It just never dawned on me that it was important to talk to my manager because I didn't need his help. And there was nothing that he was going to do for me, and I was able to get my job done. So I learned later, many years later, that he was a big advocate behind the scenes for me. So a lot of times your mentor is not someone who's in your face. It's someone who's behind the scenes speaking on your behalf. And I actually worked for him in New York, and when I came to California, I got a job right away. And I said, after I got the job, about 6 months later, I realized that I was working for him again. And I said, why am I working for you again? He says, I'm the one responsible for you getting this job. And I said, oh, okay, thank you. So, it's one of those things, again, it was an aha moment where I realized that to be a mentor, to have mentors is very important. So it meant a lot to me in terms of how I was going to advance my career moving forward. It also meant a lot to me in terms of what I was going to do for other people, because I didn't feel it was sufficient to just be successful in my own, but also to reach back and help others. And that's what I started to do, was to follow their mentorship and mentor others. And I got a lot of satisfaction out of doing that. So that was one of my first mentors. And it was almost by accident that I learned about it. But then after that, actually IBM had a very formalized mentoring program. And so if you are, I'll say, destined to have a certain level of leadership, then there's a formal mentoring program where there are people whose job it is to make sure that you're getting the opportunities that you need. And so those people played a really, really key role in my career. And a lot of times they were kind of like the person that you would least expect to be in your corner. But they were people who had the ability to not only give you good advice, but also to speak on your behalf behind closed doors. And that was very important. And so I have a lot of appreciation for all of those people that I work with. At one point, I had an opportunity, again, thanks to my mentor, to shadow one of the top executives in the company. And that was a revealing experience, and in some ways a very humbling experience, because the company was going through a very difficult time. One of the products was not doing well, and I was in his office for a week while he was dealing with all of those issues around meeting deadlines, and quality, and customer reaction. And one of the senior vice presidents came into his office, and he had to put him down because he was so full of himself. And he had to explain to him, he says, no, you wouldn't be in this position if it weren't for me. And it was through that experience, somebody else's being mentored, that I realized that nobody, absolutely nobody makes it on their own. And remember what I said about how I got started. I thought I had to do everything myself, but I realized that having mentors and being a mentor for other people is really what it's all about.
How do you mentor people now in your retirement?
Well, one of the things that I keep trying to do is to push the envelope back, because I realize that young people need help. And because when I was young, I didn't get that kind of mentorship. And as I was advancing in my career, I realized that other people were advancing faster than I was, and I couldn't figure out why they were, because they weren't smarter than I was. They didn't work harder than I did, but they knew something that I didn't know. Where did they learn that? And they learned that around the kitchen table, growing up from uncles and aunts and mothers and fathers who had important careers, whatever that career might have been, whether it's law or medicine or whatever. That's where they learn how to, how to be successful in whatever career they chose. And not to say that my parents weren't supportive, they just didn't know. My parents didn't know anything about how to advance your career in whatever you were choosing to do. They just knew how to work hard, how to study hard, how to get good grades, that type of thing. And that's the kind of encouragement that I got. But the idea of seeking out proper mentorship and then being able to provide mentorship to others was not something that I learned at the kitchen table. But that's what I do now is I work with young people to try to bridge that gap and get them of the mindset that it's time to start associating yourself with mentors now, to build your network now, and then leverage that as you move forward. So if you're looking for an internship and you're a high school student, that network will help you. If you're looking for letters of recommendation to get into the right college, that network will help you. If you're looking for a job, that network will help you. I didn't have any of those experiences growing up, so that's one aspect of mentoring that I do. Another aspect is like I said, I started a consulting business, and what I realize is that a lot of what I've learned and a lot of what I've gained experience and expertise in doing is kind of second nature. So when I consult with other people who are running their own businesses, it's very powerful. And it's almost like you don't realize you're doing it because it's second nature. But I do a lot of that when I'm talking to people and they're dealing with issues, whatever they may be in their business, and I kind of talk them through it and I help them. I realize that. So I've gotten to a point now where that's not a business for me. It's just a pleasure. I enjoy doing it. So when I have the opportunity, I do it.
They say when you're doing your life, your work, or your passion,
yes,
it's never going to be a job.
It's never going to be a job. It's never going. In fact, I stopped charging,
Yeah,
and people will come to me and say, "Well, I want you to help me with this," and I said, "Okay, I'm going to help you, but I'm not looking for a paycheck. I just want to help." Right.
We have had discussions with different people who say they came from, let's say, the South or even the East Coast, and they found California to have, California to lack a Black community. How did you overcome some of those issues?
Well, there were a couple of things that were important to me. I mean, some kind of basic things like, where's the barbershop? where's the church, where do I get my hair products and things like the kind of basic things. Those are usually pretty easy to overcome, but in terms of where is the community, where are the communications channels, where's the radio station, the TV station, the newspaper, those types of things was always a challenge for me. And I know that in certain geographical areas in California it's less of an issue, but San Jose is a huge issue, and it's even worse today than it was when I first came here in the 70s. A lot worse. At least we had a newspaper in the 70s, and we don't have anything now. And so it's a challenge. Within IBM, we were able to network within the company, and we had special bonds between us, even though we didn't come from the same areas, we didn't know each other beforehand. We had a special bond, and we worked together and we supported each other within the company. And I can say that even though I not necessarily would consider them official mentors, unofficially I had a lot of African American mentors within IBM. Colleagues of mine who were in different positions who I could go to with questions and with issues, and I knew I could always have their support. So I was able to network within the company. In the community, it was a challenge. I was really wrapped up in my work, so most of my interactions during the time I was working with IBM were internal. Since I retired in 2005, I've taken that knowledge and expertise, if you will, out into the community, and I've tried to affiliate myself with different organizations and really try to diversify my connections. Because before I was all high-tech people, and now I got colleagues who are in the medical profession, colleagues who are in the education field, colleagues who are, private business owners, entrepreneurs, et cetera, historians. I don't limit myself at all in terms of my connections. So I try to connect with anyone and everyone, and in each case try to learn from them and also see how I might be able to help them in whatever it is they're doing. So through that mutual interest and support, I built a pretty good network. And it pays off because what I find is that it's very, very difficult for somebody to come to me and say, I'm looking for this, or I need help with that. And I don't have someone that I can call on to say, okay, you're interested in getting involved in the medical field as a nurse. Well, I happen to know someone who runs a company that hires and places nurses. There you go. It's a good connection. It's a win-win for the company that's looking for prospects, and it's a win for the person who's looking for an opportunity. So I really enjoy having that kind of network that makes a difference for me. And that's another reason why I try to affiliate with organizations that add to that diversity of experience. So I've volunteered with the March of Dimes for many years, and through that I learned about political advocacy. I've been to DC, I've been to the state capitol here, I've met with legislators in their local offices, and I spent about 30 years doing political advocacy on behalf of the March of Dimes. I didn't learn that at IBM. I didn't learn that in college. I learned that by affiliating with an organization that was health-oriented. I volunteered in a lot of other capacities, mainly around youth. So I worked with the Boy Scouts of America for 10 years. I worked with the Police Athletic League and the police department, so I got to know a lot of members of the police department through that affiliation. And if I need to have any help from law enforcement, I've got lots of friends that I can go to and consult with. One of the things that I'm doing now is a project called The Rites of Passage, where we take young men and we take them through a progression to teach them how to be a responsible man. And what I do is I coordinate all of the mentors, and I have about 50 men from the community who make that up, and they're from all walks of life. So once again, it gives me that network opportunity to say, okay, that one of them is a DA, one of them is a physician, one of them owns his own company, one of them is a college professor, you know. So again, the diversity of networking. But each one of them has a common interest in helping a young person be successful and providing that mentorship. So I've taken the mentoring concept to a new level in my own experience, because we've sort of codified what it means to be a mentor and how to be better at mentoring by mentoring young people. So I think that applies no matter how old you are, and that's another learning experience for me, and I'm still involved.
There's more than just technology in the Valley, and every company has opportunities beyond engineering, beyond coding, whatever. What would you say to a person who was majoring in art and looking at the possibility of coming to Silicon Valley? What would be the opportunities open for them?
That's really a tough question. And I don't think I've ever had to answer that question. Because, so many people are attracted to Silicon Valley because of Silicon Valley, not because it's a bastion of opportunity for artistic people. But by working with a lot of young people, there's a lot of creativity out there. And I think the creativity is very important. And you can take that creativity, whether it's music or sculpture or acting or poetry. To me, it almost doesn't matter. And turn that into not just a passion, but a career. And again, as I talk to young people, I'm always listening. I'm not telling. I want to hear what they have to say. And if they say something that may be a little bit over here, off kilter, you don't want to tell them that that's wrong. You might want to be in a more positive way. I had an experience a few years ago with the middle school where they bring in people from the community who have work experience, and our job is to go into the class and to evaluate students as they're giving their various presentations. And one of the rules is you cannot be negative. Really hard to do. So if somebody's giving a presentation and they're not making eye contact with their audience, you cannot tell them that you're not making, because that's a negative statement. You can't say not. So you have to figure out a way to use the English language to get them to correct that flaw in how they're giving their presentation without being negative. That's really hard to do, very difficult. So I think a lot of that is what kind of drives me when I'm talking to people who are in Silicon Valley and they have artistic kinds of interests and skills, and just try to listen to them and what their interests are, and then try to give them some help wherever I can. It's difficult for me because I'm not in that field and I have no expertise to add to their portfolio of knowledge, but I might know someone who's in that field. I have a cousin who's a musician, so if the interest is music, I can make that connection. So again, it gets back to that network and having a diverse network. And it's always fascinating to me to realize that a lot of people have a profession or a job, but they also have a passion that's not related to that at all. I have a friend who's a gynecologist, and he likes to write poetry. So I support his poetry, right? So I think that's important to realize, and you only know that by listening to what people are talking about and what they're really passionate about. So that's how I help, and like I said, I'm not always the best one for advice in that field, but it's a matter of having the right network and diversity of colleagues who you can call upon to help other people. So I am not hesitant to ask someone else to help out at all. I thrive on else in mobilizing everybody to help. Yeah.
Dream on.
Yeah.
Looking back on your career, can you pinpoint a product or a process that changed your approach to business or changed the business that you were in? Were you responsible for anything that was significant change or?
Everything I did changed me. And I say that not facetiously. It was almost like a career plan. I tried to change jobs every 2 years. And when I say change jobs, I don't mean go on unemployment and start a job search, but plan methodically to, number one, in the job that I was in, have a transition plan so that I could move out of that in a smooth way without perturbing what I was leading, and at the same time transitioning into something new. So I started out as a programmer, writing code, testing code, all of the things that programmers do. And I got into management where I was managing programmers and developing products and doing all of that. And then over time, I got into project management, which went to another level where I had a broader scope of responsibility, and then into marketing, and then into, for lack of a better term, executive management, where you're really brokering deals between different entities. And underlying that was all of the technology and all of that. So I would say for me, it's hard to pinpoint any one thing because I was constantly changing. I spent 5 years in intellectual property management, where we were defining the law that's affiliated with software intellectual property. And then when I was done with that project, I was done. Okay, I just put that aside. I have that knowledge now. I can bring it out whenever I need it. I went into marketing, and I had to learn that area of expertise. And that, I think, was maybe, each one of these was a major turning point in my career. Starting out with the technology component, because I knew nothing about it, had to learn it, had to become good at it, had to become a certain level of expertise, and that was fulfilling. And like I said, into management, same thing, and then the legal thing with intellectual property, and then the marketing thing with trying to get the products accepted in the marketplace. Then the business relationships, all of those things were very critical to me. And at the same time, I didn't dismiss any of that knowledge, because I took that all of the prior knowledge with me wherever I went. So it was easy for me, as someone who was dealing with marketing issues, to go back and deal with technology issues, right? It was easy for me as I'm trying to make a product more acceptable in the marketplace, to be able to relate to how best to position that product from an intellectual property point of view. Just to give you an example, there's a direct correlation between managing the intellectual property and protecting the asset and providing an interface for customers to use. A direct technology concept, and we call it black box. You want to be able to present a product to a customer so that they don't have to understand anything about the internal workings of it. And I think today, if you look at a lot of the technology that everybody uses, cell phones, personal computers and things like that, it's a black box. There's only this much knowledge you have to have about what's going on the inside in order to use it for your purposes. And your purposes may be this big, or it may be this big, in terms of the scope of what that tool can do for you, but it's a black box to you. You have an interface to it, it's fairly simple, and you get what you need out of it. And I had to learn that And I learned a lot about that, trying to protect the asset, and then taking that protection notion and driving it back into the technology so that you could hide those interfaces from the end user and made it better for the end user. So there's a lot of correlation as you think about that progression from a purely technical person to someone who's looking at a broader scope in terms of how to make things happen. So I can't really point to one thing, but it's that whole series of things that I think made a difference.
Well, I think that when I heard the part where you're talking about what you had to learn in terms of intellectual property and the law, it sounds like it was unknown to everybody.
It was.
So
brand new field.
The work you
we had
did,
to teach the lawyers.
That's where I'm headed.
Yeah.
You were in that sphere. The work you did was the basis for probably a lot of the litigation that went on after you left.
Absolutely. Right? In fact, one of our attorneys wrote a textbook during that process that was in turn used by students that were studying law in college, because it was cutting edge. It was brand new. There was no previous precedence for any of that, and we had to go through the process of discovering, understanding, and ultimately perfection. Being able to say these are things that need to be done from a technology point of view to make it better. Not just from a asset protection point of view, but also from a usability point of view, to make your product more usable. So I really enjoyed it a lot.
That's the kind of thing I want to bring out, is that we were at the table when these things were being developed.
Oh, yes. I would say until I got to a point in my career where the discovery for me was my own learning, like in marketing. Every project I worked on had that characteristic about it, where it was leading edge, and we call it the bleeding edge. So the first project I worked on, TSS, was brand new. We only had a handful of customers because nobody else had the application for such technology, and now it's the basis for a lot of computing, and that's the notion of time sharing. It's an integral part of all operating systems today. The notion of virtual memory, without getting into an in-depth description of what that is, but it's just a very efficient way of conserving resources within the computer itself. Virtual machines, same thing. So I learned all of those and helped to develop those concepts in a deliverable product, which ultimately became, I like to call it, an industry standard. Same thing was true, as we talked about already, about the intellectual property idea, and then going back to an earlier discussion, when I came out to San Jose was focused on storage and primarily a hardware company, developing disk drives, tape drives, printing devices, and so forth. I was on the software side, and the software we had to develop was the software that allowed those hardware devices to interface with the human beings and their applications to actually make it work. One interesting project I worked on, we introduced kanji into all of IBM products. And this was back in the 1980s, and the markets in the Orient were just emerging for computer usage, but their language is different. And not only is it different in terms of spoken and written, but they have thousands of characters that represent their language. Well, computers weren't designed to manage thousands of characters like that. They were designed for the English language in our 24 characters or 26 characters or whatever languages we supported. So I worked on a project to go through IBM in less than a year's time and take every system, every application, every piece of hardware, and convert it to an operating environment where they could recognize these characters. And we had to go through every piece of code and find where those characters were manipulated, because we needed more bits to represent the characters, if you get my drift. So we had to go find where all of those bit representations were and change them. And at the time, I was managing a group that was doing the printing device, and I had to work with the Japanese and the Koreans and learn a little bit about their culture and their language so that we could make sure that we were providing them, the end user, with what they needed and they could use. That was fun. And I learned a lot about the culture, got to visit Japan, and we were successful. We got it done.
That's amazing. This camera, for instance, is 4K. That one is HDMI.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. The first time I went and shot with this thing, I ran out of space and I couldn't figure out why.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like that. It's
more data.
There's
right.
more data.
Yeah.
The bit rate is faster,
Right.
huge compared
Right.
to that.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
I was panicking in the middle of that interview because what happened? What happened? Well, what happened was what you say.
Right.
All this information.
It's an information explosion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In this little space that I have,
Right.
an SD card, it's like, oh, wait a minute, how can I run out? It's supposed to run for hours.
I still have the first personal computer that I purchased in the 80s, early 80s, and it has 128K of memory in it. 128,000 bits of memory. You can't find anything today with that little amount of storage, and yet it was a computer, and it did everything. At that time, it had all of the different applications. It had a word processor, it had a spreadsheet program. I went into the den one time, and my 9-year-old son had gone to the library, got a book on programming, and written a program. He had a little stick figure walking across the screen. So yeah, you could do a lot with those very limited computers. But obviously, things have changed over that period of time, and it's just amazing, absolutely amazing. It didn't have a hard drive. So imagine a computer with no hard drive, right? And that was it. And you had to program that with that understanding of what the limitations were and exploit whatever resources you had within the system, which was a level of complexity that we had to deal with back in those days. And whatever problems we had to solve with those physical limitations just added to the technology as the technology continued to advance. So it's fun.
The first computer I bought, I had to build it.
Yes.
Remember those days?
That makes a difference.
Get your own cards
Yep.
in, the whole bit.
Yep.
And you had to write a small little program to get to your document.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like you just said doc. No, you had to
Right.
tell it what to do.
Right.
So
When you have that kind of background experience, then you approach whatever the tool is, you approach it differently. It's like a car. If you know how the car works, then you approach how you use it differently, right? And actually, when I was in the military, I was a mechanic. That was my responsibility, not because I chose that, that's what I was assigned. But I had to learn how to work on all of the military vehicles, including armored personnel carriers and tanks. And so I had to learn about the internal combustion engine and the braking systems and all of that. And as a consequence, when I look at a car today, a lot of changes have come about over time with the introduction of computerizing cars, and they have cars now that drive themselves, right? Thanks to computers, but it's just a different way of looking at a tool and being able to understand it better and to be able to think about it in terms of how to use it and exploit it more.
So listening to you in your early years, I'm sure you always knew you had the capability of doing what you wanted to do. The question is, what were you willing to do?
I like that question, actually, because I was willing to do anything. And once I got into management, that became kind of like I don't know if you remember the commercial, but there was a commercial. Well, give it to Mikey. Well, I was Mikey, right? So whenever there was a tough problem or a difficult employee situation, they gave it to Mikey, and I was Mikey. So I enjoyed that role. And I'll give you one example. When we opened the Santa Teresa Laboratory in South San Jose, it was my responsibility to create the test environments for all of the development teams. And I didn't know anything about that, but I pulled together a team of folks, and we did it. And there was one situation in particular where a new product was being developed in Kingston, New York, and nobody in San Jose wanted to take on the responsibility of bringing that product out. So I said, Mikey will take care of it. And I had a couple of guys who were really excited about the opportunity, and I sent them back to New York, and they talked with the designers of the hardware and the designers of the software. They learned enough to bring it back. They set it up, they got it up and running, and it was a huge success. And nobody else wanted to do that, so Mikey took care of it. But that was fun, and the guys who worked for me, they just loved it because it was an opportunity for them. The people who needed that product in order to do their development work loved it because they needed it in order to do their jobs. So that's an example. Another example is we had to lay people off, and this happened in the 80s, and IBM had a long-standing practice of not laying people off. It wasn't a policy, it was just something that we were able to do, is to keep people. And we realized that that wasn't good for the business, and so we started laying people off in large numbers. And so once again, Mikey got called on to help out with that because I was good with people. I was very respectful, and most of the people that I had to deal with during that process were thankful. They saw it not as a negative, but as an opportunity. And so you take lemons and turn it into lemonade, right? It's that's what I learned from my grandparents, who had 5th grade educations, right? But they were smart people, very smart people.
Al, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the environment when you first came to Silicon Valley versus today's environment, and how opportunities that you see for African Americans in today's environment that may not have existed then.
It's tough because I think the Valley has changed a lot, and I think that the opportunities for African Americans are less today than they were. When I first came here, for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is because, number one, there's cheap labor outside of the U.S. And most of us African Americans are U.S. citizens, right? And so there's that challenge. Number two is, and this is one of the reasons why I decided to go back into the schools and preach STEM, because a lot of our young people are not attracted to STEM. So they may be very bright and very capable, but they're not attracted to the STEM disciplines. And so I think it's important to start early in elementary school and expose students to STEM, science, engineering, technology, and math, and get them excited about it. Because I think most of them have the skills, they just don't have the interest. And so you've got to build that interest. So that's one of the problems I see is the pipeline. The pipeline today is not the same. When I came along, you might be able to argue that the pipeline wasn't there then either, but the companies were in a position to train you. When I first hired on at IBM, I went to school for 6 months. Companies don't do that anymore. You have to hit the runway at full speed. And if you can't compete, you don't get the job. So that's a big difference. Training is so important. And you can't wait till you get to college to start studying engineering, technologies, math and science. You have to start at an early age. And to me, that's the biggest difference that I see. I mean, there's a lot of other things that are going on in terms of opportunity, discrimination, all of those kinds of things. I don't like to focus on those because I think, where you can have the biggest impact is to have people ready and able and interested in doing the work. And then you can go fight those other battles. But if what's happening is you're not feeding the pipeline, if what's happening is you're feeding the pipeline with people who can't compete, then you have less of an argument to make. So I'm on the side of let's build that pipeline and let's make sure that our people can compete.
Wilbur Jackson, thank you for sharing your story. I have learned so much about you and how you contribute to the field of technology and engineering through your work with young people. What do you need to further your contribution as a mentor going forward?
We need young people to mentor. Okay. And the other thing is we need mentors, who can come in and be effective. So one of the things I do is I train the mentors to be better mentors. I mean, some of us are just naturally mentors, but some of us need a little help, because like I said, it's a lot about listening, right? And some of us are not good at listening. We're good at telling, right? And even as parents.
Thank you again, Wilbur, and thank you, podcast audience, for listening.